Our love is stronger than the world's most pungent pickle.
I think it would be reasonable to say that Fire Emblem Fates is the Fire Emblem equivalent to the Star Wars prequels. While both of these pieces of media are far from the absolute worst of their respective mediums, their failings are large enough to result in some degree of morbid fascination, be it through genuine analysis or over-the-top shitposts. I replayed Fates sometime last year just to see how my opinion on the 3 routes of the game holds up today. I enjoyed Conquest for its gameplay despite not caring for its story. I thought Birth route was really mid, and I actively disliked Revelation. Bet you've never seen a Fire Emblem fan with any of those opinions before. Fates has plenty of flaws, even in the one route I actually like. It's got the whole package. Mechanical overhauls that fell flat on their faces, badly designed maps, really sloppy writing, cheap shock value, weirdo fan service shit, and some really problematic content. Overall, it's a giant mess of a game. However, while Fates bashing is a time-honored tradition in the Fire Emblem fanbase that I've done on this channel before and don't intend on stopping, I thought it would be fun to give credit where credit is due and list 5 things I think Fates did right. I'm gonna use 3 rules for this one. First, I cannot use any of the ultra generic takes on screen right now because they're too easy. Next, I cannot use any backhanded compliments because those defeat the entire point of this video. And finally, I cannot use anything from the DLC because I don't like the idea of paying extra to solve problems that shouldn't have been there in the first place. With all that being said, here's 5 things Fire Emblem Fates did right. What better way to kick off a video about being more positive to a game than by talking shit about a completely different game? Three Houses is a game with 4 routes and a story that you can't fully understand until you play all 4 of the routes. However, the game makes it actively tedious to replay routes because you have to get through the same first half every time. Across all 4 routes, the maps and monastery activities that you play are all the same outside of a few differences. And the story content is in a similar boat, but there's just enough differences that you can't skip cutscenes or else you'd be defeating the whole purpose of playing another route. Though weirdly enough, Fates' 3 route stick didn't suffer from this problem. The game's tutorial/exposition segment, while not perfect, is still short enough to not be completely unbearable if you have to replay it. But that's just the thing though, you don't have to replay it. On the main menu, you have an option called Branch of Fate. Basically, what this does is it takes the data from one of your pre-existing save files and creates a separate file that starts at the point where you choose a side. In other words, unless you want to play on a harder difficulty than what you had in your file, you don't have to spend any time replaying boring early game chapters to get to the new content. The game's even nice enough to let your units keep their EXP, albeit with a handful of exceptions if you want to play with a different gender quotient. Ultimately, Branch of Fate is just a really good quality of life mechanic, and I'm genuinely surprised 3 Houses didn't come up with some equivalent to it. That's enough for quality of life mechanics though. How about the real mechanics? In particular, I want to focus on capturing. Capturing enemies was a mechanic that first appeared in Thracia 776, where it was your primary way of obtaining new weapons. Then Kaga left, FE6 made a ton of cuts, and the capture mechanic was absent for 8 games. But in Fates, the mechanic was back and better than ever. This time, instead of taking items, you can actually recruit your captured units. Now, forcing a prisoner of war to join your side through bribery or threat certainly isn't conforming to the Geneva Convention, but it sure is fun to mess around with from a gameplay perspective. The way I mainly used the capture mechanic in my recent Fates run was for death fodder. I'd recruit a new enemy, send them to battle a horde of their former comrades, and have them die so that my actual units could live. It's kind of like DSFE's replacement units mechanic where you're free to satiate your bloodlust with little consequences. But if you're into something called actual strategy, then I guess you could use this mechanic too. In particular, there's 2 units that are absolutely helpful in Conquest playthroughs, those being Haitaka and Rallyman. Haitaka is a capturable boss in Chapter 9, and he has really good stats for the point of the game he's at, so naturally you'd be able to get some use out of him. And in Chapter 23, there's a Master of Arms that's gone down in history as the Rally Man, the Rally Myth, and the Rally Legend. On the highest difficulty of Conquest, he comes with 4 rally skills, making him an incredibly good unit to deploy for that brutal final stretch of the game. All in all, capturing is a fun mechanic to fuck around with and can be a great help on higher difficulties. I've already been talking about Conquest story maps because there's already a great deal of praise for them. In fact, if you listen closely to the audio of Conquest Chapter 10, you can hear Fire Emblem fans violently circle jerking over how good the map is. But I want to give praise to 2 maps that weren't specifically designed for Conquest. Now, Fate's paralogs can be hit or miss, seeing as how some of them can actually get soft-locked if you try to play them after a certain point. However, there's 2 paralogs that stand out to me for positive reasons, those being Paralog 6 and Paralog 9. Both of these paralogs are defeat the boss maps but with a twist. In Paralog 6, the boss is Cam, Candace, a master thief who is on the run after stealing some rare herbs. In Paralog 9, the boss is Funke, a burglar that recruited the help of Saizo-san, who I will now refer to as Nakaya. You have to clear both of these maps before a particular character escapes, whether it's Candace in 6 or Nakaya in 9. And this setup lends itself to some fun strategies. You have to constantly think about maximizing the efficiency of your moves and getting your units to the boss in as few turns as possible. It's kind of like the mentality that goes into LGC playthroughs, only on a smaller scale. This idea of maximizing efficiency is especially true when you consider how Dragon Veins are used. In Paralog 6, you can use them to decrease the distance between you and Candace. In Paralog 9, you need to use them to open up sections of the map. And since Dragon Veins can only be used by a handful of specific units, you're gonna have to think about how to get said units to where you need them. Paralog 9 in particular is one of the few chapters in Fate's Awakening that encourages you to transfer your paired up units and use the mechanic in a way that's more strategic than just boosting your stat numbers and calling it a day. When I played this chapter last year, I was actively thinking of ways to transfer and separate units so that I could reach the Dragon Veins and end the boss. It certainly was a welcome change of pace for most Birth Route maps. Most of what I talked about up until this point was specifically related to gameplay, but it's time to shift to talking about some of the rare good ideas from Fate's story. So, Ryoma, leader of Hoshido, absolutely broken unit, and a character you definitely don't want to misspell by one letter when you're googling them. Let's take all that and make it disappear! Early in the Birthright, you find out that 2 of the royals you've sided with have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And Ryoma's disappearance in particular has some positive effects on Birthright's narrative. It establishes a mystery that needs to be solved and gives Corrin and the other major characters a clear goal beyond just stopping the obligatory evil country. Not only that, but this plot thread has a really good payoff. Well, a good payoff from a narrative standpoint. Giving you one of the most broken units in the series is already good enough of a payoff. After a couple of skirmishes with Norians and a battle with Camilla, Corrin and friends reunite with Ryoma and find out that he was secretly leading a resistance group. This causes a narrative shift where instead of defending against Nor, Corrin's group is now actively trying to fight back. Instead, narrative shift feels really organic. I do have my issues with Birthright's story, but pacing is definitely not one of them. Birthright has a really good sense of flow, and this beautiful lobster man is someone you should thank for it. For the final thing I think Fate did right, I want to talk about my absolute favorite character from the game, at least from an unironic standpoint, and that character just so happens to be Kaze. For starters, he's just a really chill guy and naturally bounces off of other characters as a result. It goes well to say that he's one of the rare Fire Emblem characters who works well in both comedic and serious contexts. As far as comedy is concerned, a lot of Fire Emblem characters fall into the trap of beating the exact same joke into the ground, whether said joke is liking pickles, liking women, or liking to use serious mental health issues as comedic relief. Kaze doesn't have that issue because most of his comedy comes from his overall personality instead of just one gimmick, which allows him to have more than one joke. There's his Silas support, where he wants to pay Silas back for something, but his natural stealthiness gets in the way. There's his Rinka support, where he takes on a more teasing tone. And there's his Charlotte support, where he's completely immune to her attempts to charm him. But as I said earlier, Kaze also works in more serious contexts. His support chain with his brother talks about the latter's attempt to avenge their father and how they got their scar. His support chain with Severa relates to the latter's tragic upbringing and awakening. And weirdly enough, his best support chain is with one of the most heavily disliked characters in the entire franchise, Corrin. In the C support, it's revealed that Kaze openly doesn't see himself as a good person. And in the A support, Kaze explains that this is because he was unable to prevent Corrin from getting abducted and taken to Nor. But Corrin forgives Kaze, and in the end, they decide to make him one of their retainers. In general, I think Kaze's dynamic with Corrin is really strong and shows what Corrin could have worked like with better writing. Let's compare it to one of the latter's most infamous moments, the Anthony subplot. Basically, the last chapter of this subplot has Corrin almost get killed because they trusted the obvious traitor. But then, the end of the chapter has most of the main cast give a speech about how Corrin's trusting nature is actually a good thing. The problem isn't that the other characters view Corrin's trusting nature as a strength, it's that they do so in a really forced way. Their praise isn't based on any actions Corrin actually took in the story, but rather because the writer said so. Show don't tell and all that jazz. Meanwhile, in the Kaze-Corrin support chain, the former's belief in the latter is because of a specific action, that being Corrin's act of forgiveness. It just feels so much more organic. Hell, Kaze's conquest recruitment is a similar deal. After Corrin feeds Inoka's troops to their units for some sweet XP, Kaze decides to join said units because he overheard Corrin talking about their genuine wishes for peace. Like the other support chain, the use of a specific action makes Kaze's praise feel more natural than whatever the Anthony subplot was trying to go for. In essence, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Kaze represents what the ideas behind Fates look like when they're utilized to their fullest potential. As one of the handful of characters playable in all 3 routes, Kaze could choose to side with his birth country in Birthright, change sides in Conquest, or fight alongside both armies in Revelation. But no matter which of these routes he chooses, no matter who he has to go against, and no matter what suffering he is forced to watch, he stands by his decision and presses forward with kindness and with a sheer commitment to creating a brighter future.